Hey, I want to welcome you to One Place Church. My name is Pace, and I'm one of the pastors here. We want to welcome everyone who's joining us online as well. Everyone here physically, can we make some noise for our online audience? Good to have you guys. Whether you're on Schweitzer Mountain or in Hawaii, we're envious of you right now, but we're glad that you guys are joining us however you can join us. Hey, last week was an unbelievable week. We heard from Pastor Craig Rochelle. If you missed that message, I want to encourage you to go catch it online on our podcast, any way that you can find it. Grab it on our website. Go catch it on Facebook, but just go get it. We're in this series called Brutiful, and Brutiful is a made-up word. It's a made-up word because the reality is in every one of our relationships, whether it's a friendship, a work relationship, a marriage, a dating relationship, there's a brutal side, but there's also a beautiful side. And we're just taking an honest look at that. And God has a lot to say about relationships. He's got a lot to say about dating, sex, love, and marriage. And I think oftentimes the church is quiet on what God talks a lot about. And so this series, and our hopes is that it's giving you some handles to elevate all of your relationships, to make your marriages stronger, to help you have relationships that make you better people and help you really live out your purpose and your design here on planet Earth. And so I want to just encourage you guys to, if you haven't caught every session of this series, to get caught up. And last week, I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I was asking him, like, hey, what hit you last week the hardest in that message from Pastor Craig? What was it that was the most significant to you? And he said, oh, man, just what Pastor Craig was talking about when he said, not even a hint. That's what it was for him. That in my marriage, there shouldn't even be a hint of immorality. It's like it was just convicting to me, not even a hint, not even a scratch, not even just a little bit. And so I hope that when we gather weekly, our hearts are open to what God would want to say to us. Oftentimes we come into environments like this, especially if we're with our spouse or significant other, and we're hoping they hear something, right? You're like, nudge, 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 nudge. I want to just encourage you, especially today, to tune your ear into what God wants to say to you and let God do what He's going to do with your spouse or your significant other. Today we've got a little bit of a different format. You can tell probably by the setup here. In just a few moments, my wife, Sarah, is going to be joining me. You guys have sent in some phenomenal questions about dating, sex, and relationships and marriage, and we're going to talk about some of those. We're not going to be able to handle them all, but we're going to get to as many as possible because this whole idea of relationships is an avenue, and it's a place that the enemy, the devil himself, is constantly attacking. God has wired us in a way that we're not meant to do life alone. We're meant to have meaningful relationships. We're meant to have great friendships that better us. And so anything that God intends to bless and move through, you've got to know that the enemy also has a plan to kill, steal, and destroy. John 10:10 says that. It says, the thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy. But this is Jesus speaking, I've come that you may have life in the abundance. What God has for your relationship is life. What God has for your marriage is abundance. And so the enemy's always on attack, and he's got a plan. He's got a plan to counterattack what God has intended for you. In 1927, a young rising officer in the Japanese Navy, who at the time was a captain, set forth a plan. He had a dream. It was a strategic surprise attack that he dreamed up and began to work out in 1927. The captain's name was Isoroku Yamamoto. And back in 1927, as a rising captain, as a star in the Japanese Navy, he began to move throughout the different portions of the Japanese Navy. And not even knowing who this attack would go against, they had an idea, but they began to train and figure out a way that they could do this surprise attack. And the result of this attack was an attack on America that we will never forget. That attack happened December the 7th, 1941. We're talking about Pearl Harbor. The result of this surprise attack, where over 2,300 men died, over 1,100 more were seriously injured. 18 ships were destroyed, which included 5 battleships. So incredible devastation and death. And as I was reading about this and researching about this attack, it struck me that the plan for this attack started back 14 years prior. And what's interesting about that is back in that day, the minimum age for someone to enlist into the Navy was 17. So just do the math and consider this for just a moment. This attack occurred December 7th, 1941. The inception of the plan began in 1927. Hundreds of the men who died that day were between the age of 17 and 18. And what that means is that when these men were 3 years old, there was already a plan set in motion that would end or result in their death. Okay? And the reason I bring out this story is that we need to understand that really from the beginning of time, since sin has entered the picture, we have an enemy who has set out an attack plan. And some of you deal with some things relationally speaking and personally speaking that you're baffled by. You're like, I don't even know why I struggle with anger the way I struggle with anger. I don't know why I struggle with looking at pornography. I don't know why I struggle with chemical abuse. I don't know why. I don't know where it came from. I just started doing it. And there's some of you here today that the enemy set a plan back in your grandfather's day, in your great-grandfather's day. And this has been passed on to generation and generation. And now you have this bent towards, this proclivity towards a certain thing. And what I want you to hear, and I want you to lean in today, is to understand that the enemy has a plan of attack, but that we as Christ followers, we're actually fighting from victory, not for victory. And God wants to give us resource and tools so that, think about it this way. If America knew that Japan was going to attack the way they attacked, don't you think we would have had something ready for them when they showed up? They would have never made it to the island. There's no way they would have ever made it to the islands. No way at all. We would have intercepted them and we would have destroyed them before they came. And here's the thing. You and I have to wise up, relationally speaking. We've got to understand that the enemy is coming at us and that he has set a plan in motion. And we don't have to sit back and take it. We can go on the offense. And so today's conversation is really wrapped around questions that you have asked, questions with things that you struggle with in your relationships and maybe in your marriage, those of you who are single in your dating life. And so we want to talk about this. And so y'all help me welcome my wife, Sarah, up here. And really the way that we want to approach our conversation together today is we want to approach it as if we were sitting down and having just a conversation with you. And so many questions coming in, and what we really had to do is sort of group these together. One of the things that I want to just make you aware of on Wednesday at the midweek, there's some questions that we're not going to get to, but there's also some questions that I'll just say are more adult appropriate. And may make you blush in this room if we answered them right here. But we're going to answer those questions. Again, I think that so often the church is quiet about what God talks about. And so in regards to sex and purity and some of those things, our sexuality, I know that in this room there's a mix of people and a mix of ages, so we want to be sensitive to that. We're going to talk about some of it, but there's other things that we're just not going to go there. And then you as adults, you can go and you can log into Facebook and you can watch that and check out that conversation. We'll just continue that conversation. And I can tell you right now, my wife appreciates that, okay?
I don't actually think I'm old enough for that conversation, so I'm not going to be there.
So we just have a handful of conversations. And Sarah, I know the spirit behind this for you and I is we're really, in answering these questions, in no way are setting ourselves up as experts. We have been married for 21 years. We have 4 kids, so we do have some street cred. But But we realize that there's some of you who have a lot more street cred. And not only that, there's some young couples here that could probably teach us some things as well. And so we really just want to share out of what we've learned in our marriage and some things that God has taught us, and just sort of lean into that conversation. Would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say, it'll be 22 years this summer, and we have walked through some really good times. We've walked through some really hard times. And I think I can speak for both of us to say that when we've been married 30 years, we want to have a better marriage than we do today. And so I think it doesn't matter how long you've been married, even if you have a good marriage, there's always more that we can learn. I don't want to be married. I mean, we could realistically be married 70 years because we got married young. And so I want to have an amazing marriage at 70 years and not just a long marriage.
Come on. So let's jump in right into these questions. The first question, I'm just going to have you, Sarah, hit right off the top. Is it healthy for a spouse to keep in contact with an ex if their intentions were good? In other words, is it okay for them to remain friends?
Okay. If you have kids with your ex, you need to remain in contact, and you need to be friendly for your kids' sakes. If obviously you're going to have to be in contact with them, and it does not bless or help your kids if you're divorced to have a bad relationship with your ex. So for their sake, yes, you need to stay friendly. That doesn't mean you need to be friends. If you don't have kids together, there is no reason on earth that you should be texting, Facebook messaging, DMing with your ex unless you want to have another ex.
Wow. And let me just, she's got zingers all day long. Just get ready. And let me just add a why behind that. If you have an ex, whether even those of you that are dating, we have a lot of students here. If you have an ex, we have an idea that what we do naturally is we highlight the good of past relationships when the current relationship is hard. So when hard times happen, and in every marriage, in every relationship, come on, it's going to happen. All the marriage people said, what? Amen. Like, you're going to have brutal times in your relationship. And in those brutal times, if you've got an attachment to an ex, your mind is just going to go to fantasy land. And all you're going to think about is all the good and all the great, how good the sex was and how good he loved you and she did this and he did that. And your mind's going to go to that, and you're going to forget why he's your ex anyway. Right? So, again, with what Sarah's saying, if there's kids involved, you guys have to have a relationship. It doesn't bless the kids for you guys to be at odds. You need to be bigger than that. But in regards to if you're single or you're newly married after a divorce, shut that relationship down in your past. You don't have to follow them on Facebook. Come on, stop creeping. Stop trolling, It does not matter what your boyfriend in high school is doing right now. Like, really? It's not going to benefit you, all right? So, next question. What do you do when only one spouse is willing to work on the relationship?
Well, I think anybody who's been married more than about 6 weeks can testify that sometimes you give in a relationship and sometimes you take. And there are seasons where you feel like you're doing all the work, which may or may not be true. I think a lot of that has to do with perspective. But you have to be okay with there are ebbs and flows in a relationship, And I think for like the first 5 years, that really took me by surprise, where everything would be great, and we agreed about everything, and everything was just easy. And then for no apparent reason, it was like, oh, I don't really like you anymore. We don't agree about anything. You're annoying me, and it's never going to be like it was again. And then, a few weeks later, oh, I really like you. And for like 5 years, I thought, what is going on? But I think that's just relationships in general, And so if you fixate on the fact I'm the only one who ever does any work, you're going to be really dissatisfied. But I will say keep doing the work. Because if you both give up, there is no hope.
Yeah, I would say put down the microscope and pick up the mirror. Don't just assume that your spouse doesn't want to change. I think because we change differently, number one. Men and women process and change differently. A guy can set in his mind, like, ladies, have you ever came to your husbands and your husband and you're wanting to have, a heart-to-heart, something that's been bothering you, something that you really wanted to talk to him about, and you told him, you kind of, shared your heart with it, and he was just like, yeah, okay, I'll change. And you're like, that's it? Yeah, guys have the ability to change quickly on the outside, but they're just a little bit slower to change on the insides. All the ladies said, right? To where a lady, she can't change on the outside until she changes on the inside. So I think us kind of having grace and understanding that we do process different. Jesus at one point talked about the fact that all of us have, if we're not careful, we tend to point out the speck in someone else's eye when there's a plank in our own, And I think in marriage, this is real easy, especially the longer you're with someone. If we're not careful, we begin, like when you're first meeting them, you're looking at all the best things, right? You're like, oh my gosh, he's the one. He's got dreamy blue eyes, and you're looking for all the things that you have in common because you want it to work. But then all of a sudden, the longer you're with them, your lens shifts, and you, instead of having a mirror where you're seeing your weaknesses and where you're not maybe the best, you're all of a sudden like just zoning in on the imperfections of them. So I would just say, don't assume that just because right now it doesn't seem like your spouse wants to change. Number one, don't just assume that they don't want to change. Maybe they're changing in a different way. And then also within that same thought, you've just got to give an incredible amount of grace. Something you're going to hear us say 100 times during our time together is pursue counseling. Pursue counseling. Not when it falls apart, before it falls apart. Not when it gets tough, before it gets tough. It's going to get tough. Pursue that counseling, and it'll help you process some of that change. Here's the next question. Let's see. What marriage advice has been most instrumental in your marriage?
Get counseling. I mean, for real. We had a child born with a whole lot of really significant medical issues. And at the time, we also had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And he was in the middle of a career change within ministry. And it was really, really, really hard. And I think we've been married 9 years. And I don't even remember now who told us, but they said, if you've got a baby born with a lot of health needs and special needs, that can be really, really hard on marriage, so you should just go to counseling. And we did, and it was great. And I think we only went to a handful of sessions, but I thought we were going because we had a medically fragile baby, and we actually ended up talking about our parents and
fragile
finances.
Marriage.
Yeah, and so, but he, in just a handful of sessions, gave us a few tools that we still use 13 years later, and so get counseling was the very best advice. And I will say this, a lot of times insurance won't cover Christian counseling. Pay for it anyway because it is cheaper than divorce.
Whoa. You'll pay a lawyer a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I just heard somebody on the front row go, ooh, she's sassy. I heard that.
Don't let her fool you.
My mom's in here. She knows.
Oh, man. No, I'm here. I know. I know more than she knows. I've been with you longer. Anyway.
Next question.
Okay. What did you do to help stay pure in your relationship when you were dating? So single people, students, this came from you.
And that's your question. I just answered the last one.
Okay. So when we first met, we were in college, and we were friends for about 6 months before we started dating. There was an immediate physical attraction. The first time I saw her, she had a ball cap on with, a oversized sweatshirt and no makeup, and I was like, dang, girl, I'm like, if you look that good with looking like, come on, and so, but that began a friendship, and from the very beginning, that physical attraction was there. So as we started dating, early on in our relationship, we had some conversations. We were both Christ followers. I was in school to study theology and Bible, and obviously called to be a pastor. And she had a walk with Jesus herself. It's part of what I was attracted to in her. And I'm just saying that, even with all of that, it was really hard for us to keep our hands off each other. Okay? Caden, close your ears. So in the beginning, here's some things that we had to do. We had to set immediate boundaries. We had to say up front, hey, look, my intention is to go into this marriage sexually pure. My intention is to save sex for marriage. And so if you don't agree with that, this is not going to work out. And I think you got to set that early. Ladies, there's some of you that are in the dating scene. Like, I would just be bold with that conversation. Number one, I'm a Christ follower. You tell that boy that, okay? Are you? And if he says no, just say, peace out, deuces, got to go. Number two, if you are, you need to know that I'm saving myself for marriage. And girls, I'm just going to let you know right now, that's going to eliminate some dudes, okay? There's some guys that are going to look at you and go, deuces, right? See ya. But if you'll have those conversations up front, it starts to set boundaries. Even if you've had a past, sexually speaking, and you're wanting to reset. Maybe you came to Christ at a later age, or you've recommitted your walk with God. Recommitted to your walk with God. You can push a reset. You can get a mulligan. You can get a fresh start in this area in your life. But you do have to set boundaries. And so the longer we dated, the more significant the boundaries had to be. Come on, somebody. Especially the closer we got to that wedding. Right? You're like, come on, it's just a day. It's just a piece of paper. Like, we're going to get married anyway, right? Like, that's the mindset. That's the mindset. So some of the boundaries we had were like, hey, you can't come to my apartment when my roommates aren't there. Like, we tried that, and it didn't go well for us. We can't watch movies laying down on the couch. Hello? Like, right? These are some of the things. What other boundaries can you remember that we set early on? This embarrasses her, so.
I know. Gosh, I can't. That was a while ago. But we dated for 3 years. So, that was a long time. And, I just think whatever the limits are, they need to be a little more strict than you would like them to be. And you need to decide them now and not in the moment. You know, don't put yourself in dumb situations. Because a lot of times we make stupid mistakes because it's in the heat of the moment with whatever boundaries. And then, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and we both had friends who were like-minded.
Yeah. There was a lot of accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think we would have been disappointed in ourselves, and our friends would have, because we all had the same kind of standards. And so if you are surrounding yourself with people who are not holding you to a high standard, you need new friends. You need people who will help you when it's hard, and will help you in your walk with God and help you be faithful to the things that you've said you're going to do, not people who are like, it's all right, it doesn't matter,
Yeah. Yeah, show me your closest friends will show you your future, especially in this. Yeah. If you've got girlfriends that are encouraging you to jump in the bed with a guy, it's just going to be hard for you to keep that commitment, to honor God in that way. Here's another question. What advice would you give to singles?
Okay, I have 2 things for this one. Number 1 is the same advice I would give anybody, is walk with God, walk with him closely. You got to talk to him. You got to read the Bible. You're not going to know what God wants for your life if you don't know what God says, And so there are a lot of Bibles you can read. I know a lot of times they say for brand new Christians, the best Bible to read is actually a kid's Bible, because it's just easier reading. But if you've got questions about, is this the one? Should I be dating this one? What does God say? You're not going to know if you're not reading the Bible. So your walk with God needs to be paramount, whether you're single or married or whatever. The other thing I would say is, if you're single, marriage is not going to solve your problems. Marriage is going to complicate your life, especially if you get married and then you have kids. It's really going to complicate your life. And so you got to be okay with where God has you. And if you don't learn that when you're single, you're going to struggle with that your whole life. Because I knew girls who were dating and they couldn't wait to get engaged. And then they couldn't wait for their wedding. And then they couldn't wait for kids. And it's like their whole lives, you're just waiting for the next step. And so you're never content where you are. And where you are might be where you always are. And you got to be content with what God's plan is. If you are single today, that's God's will for you today. And it doesn't mean it's always going to be his will. But if you're always thinking the grass is greener on the other side, then you may rush into a relationship you shouldn't be in. And then you've just sown a whole lifetime of heartache because you were hoping that a person will fulfill all your needs. And that's not going to happen. Just be patient and walk with God.
So good. I think when we're single, we're oftentimes attracted to the things in our life that are broken. I know that sounds weird. Broken is attracted to broken, and healthy is attracted to healthy. If you want a healthy marriage, get healthy. If you want a future healthy spouse, focus in on what Sarah's saying is your pursuit of Christ, his life for you. Continue to grow in relationship with him. Allow him to be your identity. I was talking to a lady after the first service. She was married for 37 years, and now she's a widow. And I said, hey, is there anything that you think we need to say that would speak to, where you are in life? And she would just say, well, it's like I'm single all over again with 37 years of marriage history, and now I'm a widow. And she said, you know what? I'm comfortable in my own skin. I know who I am in Christ. If God brings another man into my life, it's gonna be because of my health, not because I feel like I'm needy and need someone to complete me. And I just thought, man, that's wisdom. That's just so good. Okay, Sarah's another question. What's your take on living together before you're married?
Don't. No, seriously. Obviously, God tells us things for a reason, and we don't always know the reason, but you can still trust that he knows what's best. He is very clear about there should be no sexual immorality in your life. So if you're living with a person and you are sexually intimate with them, then that is not what God has for you, and you're going to sow a whole lot of, consequences you don't want to deal with later. But even on a very scientific, secular side, polls have shown those who live together before marriage have a higher risk of divorce later. And I don't even really know the science behind it. I just know that God says don't do it, and science says it's not a great idea, so you probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah, and the logic behind it, it's sort of, when you think about it on a surface level, it sort of makes sense. You're like, hey, let's test drive this thing before we get into a lifelong commitment. Let's test drive it. And then others would say, hey, financially speaking, let's just go ahead and live together now because it makes more sense. We're going to be engaged for a year or 6 months. Let's just go ahead and, do that. But you're probably already struggling to honor God, physically speaking. You can rush into things where, foundationally speaking, when you're first dating, there's some things that need to be set in place, set in order, and things that you need to discover about them that sex will mask. Okay? Physical intimacy can make somebody look better than they really look. And I'm not talking about, unclothed. What I'm talking about is sometimes in our relationships, we rush to physical intimacy because we're not willing to do the hard yards to get to know each other emotionally, to get to know. And so I think you should, see someone in all 4 seasons.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually people who move in together, it's pretty quick. And really, the best thing, if you want to see if you're truly compatible with a person, is to date them for a very long time. Yeah. And obviously, the older we are, that advice is kind of like, I don't want to wait longer. But, we dated 3 years. Yeah.
You got to watch and observe.
Yeah.
Like, you need to see them in their natural setting. Anybody can put on, a good face. Ooh, let me ask you this. This isn't on here. Let me ask you this. Like you didn't even know this one's coming. I'm going to ask you.
Oh, look,
Okay?
my mic's not working.
What do you what do you think about online dating?
Okay, this is going to date me. I saw that question because we saw the questions ahead of time, and I was like, I don't know. That seems so weird to me. But that's because when we started dating, like there was barely the internet. We didn't have cell phones. Like we had face-to-face dating. I would say be very careful because we all know like Instagram shows everybody's best pictures, right? So online dating, obviously, they're just showing their best side. And so if you are dating someone online, you need to date them face to face. And you need to take a very long time with anybody to get to know them. But don't like do online dating and then get engaged. That's
Right.
a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I meet so many couples now, almost half, if not more, couples that I meet when I ask them, where did you meet? It's online. And I know some people who have phenomenal marriages that met online, but they did date one another. They met. So I would say online dating may be a good place to meet someone, with the proper boundaries and parameters, but get to the actual dating, getting to observe them and seeing them, getting to know them.
As a person who hates awkward, I would say I would be much more likely to do online dating than blind dates. So it might be a good way to like weed out the field, you know what I'm saying? And then date in real life.
Yeah, okay. I want to back up to a question because this one hits really close to home for a lot of us. Since God hates divorce, if you get a divorce, are you hated or forgiven?
God hates divorce. God does not hate divorced people. And I think we struggle with this because it's like people who are divorced and then remarry, because it says in the Bible, the whole passage about divorce and remarry, and is that adultery and all, And so people struggle with it. But it also says that God hates lying. We don't struggle with that one quite as much, And so I think sometimes we put like a scarlet A on some things and not on others. We're kind of selective. This sin is, this is taboo, and if you commit this, then God's done with you. And it doesn't say that. It just says God hates divorce. I think God hates broken relationships, and he hates the collateral damage that happens when a marriage comes undone. I think it makes him sad, but it doesn't make him hate you. And if Jesus on the cross said, I forgive, like this is for everything, I forgive every sin, he did not say except divorce. It is not the unforgivable sin. Yep. Forgive yourself and move on.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part. Forgive yourself and move on. You're not baggage. You're not marked. You're loved. You're favored. You're a child of God, and God is interested in your future. God is interested in what he can do in your future relationships. And we all have made mistakes, and I would just venture to say that there are people here I know who are married and been married for a long time who maybe have made some of the same mistakes that ended up in another couple's divorce. You see what I'm saying? That there was forgiveness on both sides. God would have forgiven the couple who stayed married, and God also forgave the couple where it ended in divorce. God does hate divorce, but as Sarah said, I believe the reason because of that is the pain that it brings. We can all just be honest and say, no matter how well a divorce goes, there's still pain. And God doesn't want to see us in that kind of relational wreckage. So God's intention for marriage is one man, one woman for a lifetime. But we're messed up people, and we make mistakes, and we step into things that maybe we shouldn't have stepped into. So I wanted to come back to that question. Next one, Sarah. What are some communication tips for young married couples is how the question was asked, but it's really true for all couples.
Okay. If you talk a lot, you should talk less and listen more. That one is for me.
Wow.
If you don't talk as much, then you should talk more. Because you can't have one spouse doing all the talking. And usually the ones who are like more open and that we just can like verbally run over our spouse. And the man never talks because you never give him a minute. And so it's got to be two ways.
Yeah.
For sure.
Let me just talk to the guys here for just a second. If we will learn to be specific and vulnerable, it does an incredible good for communication. So girls do this a lot more naturally than guys do. Come on, guys. Girls know how to be specific, don't they? Like painfully specific, and they'll go historical on you too, Back 1978, they'll go historical on you. She's giving me the dirty eye over here. But if we'll just learn to be specific. See, sometimes we would rather sweep it under the rug, maybe because of pride. We don't want them to know that they bothered us, they hurt us. We want to be tough. We don't want them to think they can get to us in that way. And so what you end up doing is kind of, pushing it aside, putting it up under the rug, or, stowing it away, and later on you just blow up on her anyway. If you'll learn to, when you feel offense, when you feel hurt, when you feel rejected, whatever it may be, if you'll learn to have the conversation and be specific when you said this, when you did this, this is the way it made me feel. So the specific part is this is what you did. The vulnerable part, fellas, is this is how it made me feel. And when I've done that in our relationship, the conversation just goes to a greater depth and brings resolve in the outcome that you're actually wanting, that you're not going to get if you just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, I have one more tip.
Yep.
I forgot about this. Don't go passive-aggressive on your spouse. Meaning, don't say things about them in front of them in a group that you wouldn't say to them. You know what I'm saying? Like I think we've all seen couples in a conversation, and I normally see the wife, but I'm sure husbands do this too, where you criticize your spouse in front of a group, and it's just passive-aggressive because you really want them to hear, you always or you never or whatever. But I think that we tend to rise to the level that we're treated. And so if I treat Pace like he's an idiot, which is kind of how in our culture today it shows women portraying their husbands, right? Like she's all put together and he's like this bumbling fool. If I treat Pace like that, that may be what I get. But if I speak about him, especially in front of him, in a way that lifts him up, that's what I'm going to get. And so I think we got to quit cutting down our spouses, particularly in front of them.
That's great. How do you communicate about decisions when you're in a hard time in your relationship? You're going through a tough time, you've got a major decision, or you've just come into a fight, and it's one of those intergalactic fights where the tension between the two of you is incredibly thick. How do you communicate about decisions in those moments?
Is that my question?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, man. Well, I would say if you can put off the decision until you're not both mad. That would be helpful. You get the rest of that.
Well, I guess to add to that is, one, just to say that we all have those moments in our marriage where there's tension and there's conflict and there's fighting. And decisions in life doesn't stop because we're fighting, right? And you're facing decisions. And I think one of the things, what she's saying when we say, hey, put it off, I think it's helpful to schedule it. So, if you're in a place where you're fighting every day, put the fights off until Friday. Hey, we're talking about this on Friday. One day of really good fighting is better than 7 days of fighting, right? Schedule that stuff. Schedule it. I'm serious. Schedule it. Schedule it and say, hey, on Friday we're going to sit down. We're going to have discussions around this. And then, what you'll find is okay, there's a due time for us to talk about this issue. In the meantime, there's decisions that we have to make as a couple. There's decisions that we have to make for our kids. There's decisions that we have to make about bills and our future and all those kinds of things. And if I know that, no, the issue's not, we're not sweeping it. Like if she knows, no, you're not getting out of this. On Friday, we're talking about it. Then I can get some mental space and emotional bandwidth to make these other decisions with you. Does that make sense? Okay, last question, and then we're out of time. How do we get back to where we started when we have so many layers of hurt? And then, band, you guys can.
Man, that's a heavy one. Okay. You're never going to be back to where you were. You don't ever really want to be back to where you were. You don't want to be married 40 years and have the same marriage you did at year 1. I mean, we all grow and we change. We are radically different in our 40s than we were in our early 20s, and we should be. But I'm assuming this question means like adultery, betrayal of some sort. You're never going to go back to where you were, but you can be better than you were. If you're willing to work on your marriage and you're willing to allow God to work on you and get professional counseling and do what the counselor says and stay committed to each other and be for each other, agree, we're going to stay married, so I am for you, I am not against you, then I think you can come through even things like affairs and you can be stronger on the other side than you were to begin with. But you can't give up. And you can't be passive. You've got to stay in the fight, and it's hard, and nobody wants to stay engaged that long in something that hard. But I have seen couples who have made it through to the other side and now have ministries to other couples who have gone through affairs and stayed together, and they are so much stronger now than they were 20 years ago. It doesn't have to mean the end, but you've got to stay in it.
Yeah, I think working through those layers, and we all have them, is like being rerouted on your GPS system. You know, like Waze reroutes you if there's a wreck or, you know, if a change in traffic has taken place. Never once does Waze say, sorry, try tomorrow. You know, it reroutes you. It may take a little bit more time. It may take you off the beaten path. It may frustrate you, but what do? You follow the instruction, you commit to the plan and the direction, you make a way. And God has a way, and God has a plan, and God has a direction for your marriage. He has a direction for your relationships. And if you'll commit to it, and you'll commit, and I would say this, and I don't think we've mentioned this, but I think you can hear it in the tone and the spirit of it. Some of you need to burn your bailout plan. You need to say that divorce is not an option. You just need to say, you know what, that's off the table. Because maybe right now you're going through a rerouting stage and you face some difficulties, you face some hardship, you face some things that you didn't expect in this journey. You're on a trip together in life and you had no idea that he was going to be this way. You had no idea that she was going to do that. And God, if you'll give him ear, God will redirect your path. And he'll make your path straight. That's a promise. He can do that. But there's a surrendering, us being willing to hear him, to lean into what he would want to do.